Long before the famed English longbowmen rose to dominate the battlefields of the Middle Ages, there came another feared group of archers whose reign would last thousands of years. They hailed from the land of the bow, far beyond the southern borders of Egypt. Yet, despite the remoteness of their homeland, these warriors were known far and wide as marksmen without peer and employed as prized mercenaries by many armies of the past. These were the Nubian Archers, Longbowmen of Africa. Today, let us dive into the rich history of their unit and their country.
You can learn much more about the lands of the Nile with the 4-part documentary series The Story of Egypt, available for streaming now through our sponsor Magellan TV. It does a great job showing the ancient civilization's rich landscape and culture, while sharing the stories of the numerous leaders, heroes, scholars, explorers, and villains who shaped its history. The episode Invasions is dedicated to the other neighboring powers, like ancient Nubia, which will be a great accompanying piece to our own episode today, showing famous sites of their power in the south. History videos like this are added weekly to Magellan TV, which already has a collection of over 3,000 videos to choose from among the categories of history, science, nature, space, and more. You can watch The Story of Egypt or any documentary that catches your interest by clicking the link in the description below or going to try.magellantv.com/invicta to get a 1-month free trial. Enjoy!
Nubian archers hailed from the lands of the southern Nile, which lay far beyond the traditional borders of Egypt. Both of these neighboring civilizations shared long histories that stretch back thousands of years to the very dawn of human history. Each would be molded in its own way by the differences in their respective environments. For instance, closer to its source, the Nile carves its way through hard rock, meandering and crashing over a series of 6 major cataracts. Eventually, however, it begins to straighten out and widen as it finally turns into a wide delta that spills into the Mediterranean. The consequences of this geographic determinism are that the southern lands around Nubia have narrow or non-existent floodplains which make irrigation difficult. Meanwhile, the presence of numerous cataracts greatly impede waterborne travel. Inversely, the northern lands around Egypt have wide floodplains that make agriculture easy, while unbroken north-flowing currents and south-blowing winds make travel luxuriously simple. Such differences would foster the development of 2 diverging yet entwined civilizations with a natural friction point where one environment transitioned to the other around the location of the first cataract. At first, both lands would have seen centuries of glacial development. Here, various small communities in primitive social structures ruled by chieftains vied for local supremacy. For some time, researchers believed that it was the Egyptian civilization, blessed with more favorable conditions for agriculture and trade, that matured beyond this state more quickly. In support of this claim would be ample evidence which points to the emergence of important early kingdoms in the lands of the north between the 4th and 3rd millennia BC. These in turn would eventually unify under Narmer, the first pharaoh of Upper and Lower Egypt, around 3100 BC. However, absence of evidence is not evidence of absence, and various other modern factors have limited our understanding of the Neolithic period of Sudan. Exciting studies from the last few decades have revealed that the people of Nubia were in fact quite capable of keeping up with their northern neighbors, and produced several important pre-dynastic kingdoms with complex societies and wide connections to the outside world. Unfortunately, flooding caused by the Aswan Dam and a poor state of preservation in the region have done much to keep us from learning more about these groups. By the 2500s BC, though, our shrouded vision of the past begins to clear with the ascension of the kingdom of Kerma. This rising power began as an important urban center that dominated the area surrounding the Third Cataract. Eventually, it gained control of the vast lands extending from the First to the Fourth Cataracts, thus rivaling the size of its contemporary rulers to the north. Within its borders lay a multitude of different tribes and peoples with their own particular ethnicities, cultures, religions, and dialects. Yet this was no apparent obstacle. The Kingdom of Kerma appears to have been a highly centralized state, which drew wealth from its lands, namely agriculture, pastoralism, animal products, mineral processing, and trade with the African interior. It leveraged these resources for the construction of new monumental architecture, the expansion of important irrigation projects, and the advancement of sophisticated metallurgical practices. At the same time, its military also evolved into a formidable army of skirmishers, footmen, cavalry, chariots, and war elephants, which clashed frequently with their neighbors. It is as a result of these battles that we first hear of the infamous Nubian Archers. Let us now review what these would have looked like. We can start to get a sense of this from numerous artistic depictions and written descriptions recorded by both the Nubians themselves and their neighbors, who came to know them quite well. In terms of physical appearance, they are shown as being of dark skin with tall, muscled bodies. Herodotus indicates that for battle, some among them painted their bodies half with chalk and half with vermilion. Often they can be seen wearing skirts accented with animal pelts and other forms of prideful ornamentation. Their heads, for instance, often sported distinctive hairstyles with additional plumage to make them stand out even further. But what makes these imposing figures even more impressive are the massive bows they carried with them. These were self-bows, made from a single piece of wood which measured anywhere from around 1.5 to 2 meters in length, approximately the same size as the later English longbow. However, where it differs is that the Nubian longbow features reflexed tips which bend away from the archer when the weapon is unstrung. This likely would have been done using steam in order to improve the bow's performance when drawn and increase its power. Another interesting feature of such bows is that they do not appear to have used notches for securing the bowstring at its ends. This seems to have been done so as not to weaken the bow under high stress. Instead, the bowstring would have been secured by way of tied leather bindings. Self-bows of such size would typically be drawn to a length of around 60 to 70 centimeters. This meant that an optimal arrow would have a shaft just slightly longer than that amount. These projectiles would be made of seasoned palmwood, reed, or sturdy cane that was further smoothed out and may have been painted red or black. Their tails featured feather fletchings attached with an adhesive along with a knock end. Meanwhile, their points were capped by a variety of arrowhead forms. Herodotus states that these were made of stone, but we have evidence of bone, ivory, and iron tips as well. Basic versions came in a triangular point, while others had longer stems and might include sets of barbs. By some accounts, these arrowheads may have even been poisoned. Some researchers have been able to lend credence to this idea by running tests on residue found on ancient Egyptian arrowheads, which reveal some level of surviving toxicity. Interestingly, several carvings and statues depict Nubian archers walking proudly to war with arrows in hand. However, other evidence reassures us that they did indeed make use of quivers. Several of these from later periods have actually survived. Normally made of rawhide and tanned leather, they are elaborately decorated with many embossings, adornments, and streamers. Most examples appear to have been worn at the side, but some, like this tube-shaped design, were likely slung across one's back. Other specialty gear employed by these archers included bracelets and rings. Bracelets were worn on one's bow arm, to protect the skin from the recoil of the bowstring. One surviving example seems to have had a paired thumb cover, which has led researchers to believe Nubians rested their arrows on their thumbs, holding it on the right side of the grip, which is opposite of the technique commonly used by contemporary European bowmen. Archer rings also helped with using a bow and arrow and are frequently found in Nubian archaeological sites. They may have been used as a rest for the arrow alongside the riser, or helped serve as a convenient hook for drawing the bowstring. In addition, these Nubian archers probably carried an array of other weaponry. Daggers would have been a must given their general utility, but for more offensive punch in close quarters, a warrior could also wield something like the shotel-style sword. Based on other carvings, they might also have wielded axes and clubs when the situation demanded. As for the secrets of how these Nubian archers trained, we sadly have little information to go on. Likely, most of their techniques would have been a matter of built-up generational knowledge, with specific skills being honed through constant repetition. Hunting, in particular, must have played a huge part in the history of Nubian archery. Their lands were rich with all manner of wild game that could be hunted for sustenance, sport, trade, or tribute. This was certainly true in northern Egypt, where we routinely hear of the exploitation of such wildlife. Nobles, in particular, were known to ride out on horse or on chariot to take on particularly large animals. Perhaps the elite of the Nubian archers similarly competed to take down the most prized trophies. It seems likely that additional practice also occurred back in the major urban centers. Here, the walls of temples and palaces are studded with glorious depictions of various leaders and their bows. Perhaps this was similar to the wrestling competitions we see Nubians participating in on several Egyptian wall paintings. It's not difficult to imagine, therefore, that prominent figures were keen to show off their skill with the bow as a symbol of status. This was certainly the case with Nubian rulers who flexed that might before foreigners who visited their lands. For instance, when spies of Cambyses were discovered in the realm, the king of Nubia brought them before him and said, quote, "When the Persians can draw a bow of this greatness as easily as I do, only then should they bring overwhelming odds to attack the long-lived Ethiopians. But till then, they should thank the gods for not giving the sons of the Ethiopians a mind to win more territory than they currently have." When it came time to fight, each individual warrior would have to be slotted into the organization of the Nubian military. Once again, though, we lack any real understanding of what this looked like. Based on general principles of how tribal forces assemble, though, it seems reasonable to assume that they assembled locally under village chiefs, who in turn pooled their might on the level of the clan, then tribe, then kingdom. Given our lack of any specifics, it is tempting to brush off the organization of Nubian forces as being simple or primitive. Yet, this was certainly not the case. As we stated before, the rulers of Nubia ran a quite centralized and militarized state, which often brought its great resources to bear when it came to war-making. Constant fighting in and of itself forced them to adapt to survive, but they also had frequent exposure to the inner workings of the Egyptian army, as mercenaries over the centuries and even as commanders during the 25th dynasty. Meanwhile, their service in other armies, like that of the Achaemenids and Ptolemies, ensured that the Nubians remained well-versed in the military affairs of their day. A similar conversation can be had when it comes to the tactics of the Nubian archers. We know little for sure, but can be quite confident that they were sophisticated and effective. The first thing to point out is that they seldom functioned alone. Nubian armies were mixed forces that fielded units of spearmen, axemen, swordsmen, cavalry, chariots, and even elephants. If they followed the traditional Egyptian model, then massed blocks of archers would be used to soften up the enemy, while mobile forces worked the flanks and the center prepared to unleash a decisive charge to finish the job. This matches the description given to us by Diodorus Siculus, who states, quote, "After their arrows are exhausted, they finish the fight with wooden clubs." But it wasn't just in pitched battles that the Nubian archers proved useful. As light troops, they could advance quickly over terrain to act as raiders, conducting hit-and-run tactics or ambushes against enemy detachments or slow-moving forces. They also proved incredibly useful in fights over the many formidable fortifications which sprung up along the Nile. Here is one particularly evocative description of what the Achaemenids encountered when they ventured into the land of the bow. So from the battlements, as though on the walls of a citadel, the archers kept up with a continual discharge of well-aimed shafts, so dense that the Persians had the sensation of a cloud descending upon them, especially when the Kushites made their enemies' eyes the targets. So unerring was their aim that those whom they pierced with their shafts rushed about wildly in the throngs with the arrows projecting from their eyes like double flutes. When it comes to the full service history of the Nubian archers, there is much we could potentially cover, as they saw action for literally thousands of years. For the sake of this video, we can break things out into each major period with some highlights. The first period would have been that of the Kingdom of Kerma, which we previously mentioned. It lasted from around 2500 BC to 1500 BC. The early years were likely characterized by much Nubian on Nubian infighting as the final embers of resistance were stamped out. Once unified, however, the famed African longbowmen could turn their attention outwards. This meant constantly being on guard against the desert tribes that preyed upon their herds and trade routes. Other times, it meant selling their services in the employ of other armies. Under a strong leader, however, the Nubians would be marshaled with a greater purpose to raid the lands of Upper Egypt. During this period, various inscriptions speak of massive invasions pouring out of the south, which prompted pharaohs of the Old and Middle Kingdom to start fortifying the entire area around the first cataract. Though many of these defenses, like the Buhen Fortress, appear impregnable, records indicate they were stormed repeatedly by Nubian troops. The peerless aim of the archers in particular must have been crucial in clearing the walls for such assaults. However, the ascendancy of New Kingdom Egypt in the 1500s BC would see the northern civilization at its peak, with little that could stand in its way. As a result, much of the Kingdom of Kerma would be conquered and assimilated. For the Nubian archers, however, this did not mean an end to the fighting. Instead, they would now be fully absorbed into the Egyptian military, their rank and file often serving abroad, and their officers frequently rising to positions of high power. Sometimes, however, rebellions would flare up with Nubian arrows once again finding their way into Egyptian skulls. This was particularly true around the 1100s BC, when the New Kingdom fell into terminal decline. As it collapsed, the Nubians would rise from the ruins to rebuild their own kingdom, centered around Napata. This new power proved even more successful than its predecessor. By the 750s BC, Nubian archers were once again on the offensive, pushing as far as Thebes and under King Pia, seizing the entirety of Egypt. For nearly a century, the Nubians ruled as the legitimate and powerful 25th dynasty. Together with the Egyptians, they fought many bloody battles against their neighbors, like the newly ascendant Neo-Assyrians. Several surviving inscriptions portray the vicious sieges waged between these combatants. Ultimately, however, the pressure from the east proved too much, and the Nubian rulers pulled back to their southern heartland. Yet more fighting ensued as a resurgent Egypt now pursued them, sacking the capital of Napata in 592 BC. As a result, King Aspelta would move his administrative center to the more southern city of Meroe. From here, the Nubians would rebuild themselves and quickly regain their strength. When the Achaemenid Empire conquered Egypt in 525 BC, they next attempted to invade Nubia. The result was a disaster caused by the staunchness of the defenders and the fortuitous arrival of a sandstorm that swallowed vast portions of the enemy army. In the aftermath, a tenuous peace was established, which saw Nubian soldiers supplied to the Royal Achaemenid army. Numerous sources point to these serving as far away as Greece in the Persian Wars. Over the following centuries, the kingdom of Meroe would go on to evolve in ever more fascinating ways. For example, efforts to fight back against entrenched northern influence saw King Ergomenes massacre the priests of Amun at Napata and relocate the royal tombs to the south. Meanwhile, there was a greater mixing with the surrounding sub-Saharan cultures of the region, along with new imports from the Hellenic world, like Greek philosophy that accompanied the arrival of the Ptolemaic dynasty. We have no records of major Nubian wars in this era, but it is sure that there would have been the usual border skirmishes and tug-of-war taking place around the region of the First Cataract. The next conflict of note would occur in 25 BC, when the Nubians launched an invasion against the newly minted province of Roman Egypt. This, in turn, would be met with a counter-invasion that saw a series of pitched battles and sieges culminate in a standoff by the fortress of Premnis. We cover this conflict in greater detail in another video, which you can check out. But once the dust had settled, life along the Nile returned to the usual balance of power that had existed for millennia between north and south. This would last until the 3rd century AD, when the kingdom of Kush would be weakened by internal rebellion and eventually invaded by the rising power of Aksum. Yet, even after this occurred, archers of the Nubian territories would continue to fight on for centuries. We hope you've enjoyed this deep dive into the history of the Nubian Archers and their incredible civilization. Let us know what unit of history you would like to see us cover next. A big thanks to the patrons for funding the channel and to the researchers, writers, and artists who made this episode possible. Be sure to like and subscribe for more content and check out these other related episodes. See you in the next one.